All right. Then they go on to ask him about just something completely unrelated to him being a gun runner.
You weren't a gun runner. Absolutely not. All right.
Right.
And you're right. If people don't know this story, Google it.
Pause it. I love it. You know, if you're a news commentator or a host of a show and you have to say to your guest, you weren't a gun runner, like, I think there's a good indication that that person was probably a gun runner. Go ahead.
All right, now let's talk about something else you know intimately about, and that's the struggles with Iran really since 1979. A deal was signed in 2015 that would limit their nuclear program. Not many people thought it was a good deal. The Senate didn't approve it. The House didn't approve it. And clearly this president's not for it. At 2 o'clock today, indications are we're walking away from that deal. Is that the right move?
Yes.
Why?
You want me to elaborate? Well, because the Iranians have been lying. Every time their lips move, they're lying. The Iranians were working with the North Koreans until just a few weeks ago on their nuclear program and their ICBM program. And the Europeans, who simply want to keep things as they are for the trade value, the fact is, if we sanction them again, we ought to sanction anybody else who does business with them. That'll stop the Euros from helping to bail them out while they cheat on this program.
Well, first off, this guy, that is all that we're doing. We don't have primary sanctions on them as a function of this deal. We have secondary sanctions that are explicitly, we will sanction European entities that do business with Iran. So that is exactly what it means to walk away from the Iran deal. But the idea that this guy's saying that they lie every time their mouths are moved is laughable, and that this is completely different from since 1979 when we've been at odds with Iran.
Well, he hasn't been at odds with Iran since 1979 when he was selling weapon systems illegally to fund illegal war in Central America. But also he's doing this ICBM thing, which I've never even heard the North Korea story, so that could just be like a Newsmax thing. That's
bound up with the $10 million that are missing apparently.
Right, exactly. I won't even grace that with a comment. But the ICBM thing is the poison pill that they've always tried to use to kill the deal, which is namely throw in things that are not specifically nuclear to try to destroy it. So they're playing the same games that they did back when it was being negotiated.
This deal from the very beginning was narrowly tailored to deal with specifically what we hope to achieve from North Korea, which is to have them denuclearized. And in fact, not only was it narrowly tailored by design, it was narrowly tailored. This was the suggestion from the Israelis at the time. Everyone in the foreign policy establishment said, you bite off a smaller part of the apple, and the part of the apple that is really deadly for everybody. And that being the nuclear program. So this has been a long-standing critique, and it was a critique that was built into the actual development of the deal. In other words, on some level, I think the reason why this deal was encouraged was because there would be room for folks like John McCain, frankly, to criticize it back in the day.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, they didn't go after areas of joint agreement, frankly, like around groups like ISIS, precisely because on both sides, a more dovish and more hawkish side, it was just agreed, we're not doing anything bigger here than that specific program. So it's incredibly dishonest.
So here is there are a couple of scenarios going forward that are possible. Scenario one is that the Europeans basically defy the United States. And they continue to trade with Iran, and and then I should say it's more expansive than just Europeans, but this is where it's going to be most dramatic in terms of sanctions. They continue to trade with Iran, and we start to sanction these companies, and we create a greater rift between ourselves and European allies. And Iran hews to the deal and continues to allow weapons inspectors into Iran and stays within the regime outlined in this deal that over the course of the next, 9 years now or so, would materially limit and inhibit and prevent their development of nuclear weapons. After 10 years, they're still not allowed to get nuclear weapons, but the constraints on them begin to loosen, and theoretically, they could then break the deal. But there's no way for them to develop nuclear weapons under the regime as it exists. This, of course, is what even Mad Dog Mattis said the other day in Senate testimony.
And they haven't actually done a huge amount of trade. But I think that they will keep the deal because the primary reason to keep the deal is just because of the security benefits. Like, everybody exaggerated the economic stuff, and their trade relationships are mostly with Russia and China, which will obviously continue regardless. So the Europeans, I'm sure at the very least, will say, yeah, let's keep being diplomatic and having inspectors in there. And maybe on the back end, it will slow some business agreements because that's a major headache. But I can imagine they'll pull out of it.
So the scenario you're talking about is where basically any companies that were planning to do business with Iran don't, but they reserve the right to do it.
Exactly.
They just don't subject themselves to American sanctions. I mean, that would be the best case scenario. And apparently John Kerry was going around a couple, there was a story in the Boston Globe maybe a week or two ago about John Kerry going around basically as like a shadow entity trying to maintain this agreement without the United States, which theoretically would be the deal killer. If the other option is that the Europeans, for whatever reason, announce that they're dropping out of the deal too, so that they're not subject to other sanctions, I guess. And the Iranians just say, okay, we're going to start developing our nuclear weapons tomorrow. And then this, of course, is exactly what I think someone like Bibi Netanyahu wants, because that becomes then the predicate for some type of bombing run where they supposedly take out a nuclear bomb-making facility in Iran. I mean, that's how this would go down. So best case scenario, Donald Trump and the United States are ignored and are considered unreliable partners and irrelevant to a large extent. And some entities will bite the bullet in Europe and not do business with Iran. And this thing can go forward. But it really is problematic. I mean, I don't know how we'll see what happens with North Korea, but what possible
great negotiating start. Like, hey, the model agreement that could probably work for us. Yeah, we just junked it.
And we should also tell you that if we make an agreement, it may not last more than 3 years.
Well, that's actually what the Supreme Leader said, except what he said when he gave Rouhani. He said, you have permission to negotiate, but something like never trust the great Satan, to paraphrase. And of course, Trump was like, I will make it my mission to validate all of his statements.
I hate to use this phrase, but hold my beer.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, that's the...
hold my Big Mac.
Man, I'm going to go down a YouTube K-hole tonight on Iran-Contra, I think.
Oh, you should.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I didn't realize North was so gangsta.
Oh, he's quite gangster.
Oh, yeah. In fact...
gangster, not gangsta, though.
Now that I recall it, I think it's possible I have... is it possible I have refrigerator magnets from that? I just remember...
I would say it's very possible.
It's possible. I took some pictures of my TV. I don't know if that